Control is not a superficial desire that some men casually harbor. It is a complete psychological architecture, a way of existing in the world that turns every human interaction into a chessboard where all pieces must move according to a pre-established pattern. The man who needs to control everything is not simply being authoritarian or dominant. He is executing a deep program inscribed in his psyche, often engraved there by wounds so ancient that he doesn't even remember having received them. He lives in a universe where uncertainty is poison, where others' autonomy is an existential threat, where allowing something to escape his direct supervision is an invitation to chaos that once nearly destroyed him. This is not a cartoon villain. He is an engineer of obsessive order who has decided that the only way to be safe is to ensure that nothing, absolutely nothing, can ever surprise him again. Your control is not gratuitous cruelty. It is an hypertrophied psychological immune system that has learned to identify freedom itself as a pathogen. The genesis of this drive for total control is often rooted in early experiences of absolute helplessness. A child who grew up in a chaotic home, where violence was random and unpredictable, where promises made by adults were worthless, and where each day brought new configurations of terror without a discernible pattern, learns a devastating lesson. Trusting others exposes one to annihilation. They then develop a survival strategy that seems logical, even noble in its original context. If the world is fundamentally treacherous, if people are inherently unreliable, then the only security lies in not depending on anyone, in controlling every variable, in transforming from a passive victim of chaos into an active architect of order. The problem is that this strategy, perhaps useful for surviving childhood in a toxic environment, becomes the template through which all future relationships are processed. The child who learned that control equals survival transforms into the adult who experiences any relinquishment of control as a small death, as a regression to that original state of terrifying vulnerability that he swore never to experience again. This underlying terror of losing control manifests in behaviors that to an external observer seem purely tyrannical, but for the controller are defensive, necessary, rational. He monitors his partner's phone not because he enjoys invasion, but because the possibility of conversations he is unaware of is psychologically intolerable. He micromanages every detail at his workplace, not because he underestimates his employees, but because delegating responsibility means accepting that results will partly depend on others' decisions, and that dependency triggers primitive alarms in his nervous system. He structures his children's lives with military rigor, not because he is naturally authoritarian, but because an unpredictable child who makes unsupervised decisions, who could make mistakes outside his visual field, is a living reminder that there are things in the universe he cannot control, and that reminder is intolerable. Each act of control is simultaneously an attempt to manage the external world and a ritual to calm the internal panic that arises whenever it perceives that the external world might have a will of its own. The devastating irony of this psychology is that the absolute control it seeks is impossible, and its pursuit of the impossible guarantees its eventual failure. People are not machines. They cannot be perfectly programmed. They have wills, desires, secrets, internal lives that remain opaque no matter how much surveillance is applied. Every human is fundamentally an irreducible mystery, a center of consciousness that can never be fully known or controlled by another. The compulsive controller repeatedly clashes with this basic reality, and each collision reinforces their conviction that they need to control more, monitor more intensely, eliminate more spaces of autonomy. They become addicted to a project that is doomed from the start, and like all addicts, they constantly increase the dose, seeking an effect that the substance can never provide. You need to control more because your previous attempts at control failed to generate the promised security, without recognizing that total control over other human beings is categorically impossible, that you are chasing a mirage that recedes at the same speed as you advance. This pursuit of the impossible contaminates all their relationships with a particular toxicity. A couple that is constantly monitored, whose friendships are forbidden, whose decisions are supervised, cannot develop genuine love towards the controller. They may develop dependence, fear, resignation, even a perverse form of gratitude when the control is temporarily loosened, but not love. Love requires mutual recognition of full humanity, trust in the other's autonomy, acceptance that the other might choose to leave, but chooses to stay. The controller destroys these preconditions of love in their attempt to ensure that their partner can never leave them. They create exactly what they fear most: an empty relationship where only the shell of intimacy remains, where their partner has learned to perform affection convincingly, while their true inner life, their real self, retreats to places where the controller cannot reach it. He has gained physical obedience, but has lost access to the only thing he was truly seeking: genuine connection with another human being who freely and voluntarily chooses to be with him. Children of controlling parents develop complementary pathologies that perpetuate the generational cycle. Some rebel, develop allergies to any form of authority, sabotage their own lives in the name of proving that no one can control them. Others internalize the paternal model and become controllers themselves, repeating the patterns that hurt them because it is the only form of relationship they know intimately. Still others develop a kind of double life, presenting facades of perfect obedience while secretly cultivating complete alternative lives that they meticulously hide. None of these outcomes is what the controlling father supposedly sought. He wanted successful, stable, secure children. They produce children who carry the mark of their control as a permanent scar, who will spend decades in therapy trying to undo the conditioning that taught them that love and vigilance are synonyms, that care and restriction are interchangeable, that the only way to be safe is never to reveal your true self to anyone. In the professional realm, the compulsive controller often attains positions of power because the corporate organization rewards certain aspects of their psychology. Their obsessive attention to detail, their intolerance for error, their ability to work tirelessly micromanaging processes, all of this may seem like managerial excellence in contexts where short-term results are the only metric. They rise through hierarchies because modern bureaucratic structures were designed for people exactly like them, for whom control is confused with competence, surveillance with leadership, conformity with performance. But eventually, their limitations become evident. Talented employees leave because no one with options tolerates being treated long-term as a robotic extension of the boss's will. Those who remain are those without alternatives, or those who have learned to play the game, to generate appearances of conformity while minimizing real effort. The department they lead may look impressive in reports because all the correct numbers are in the right places, but creativity has died, initiative has been extinguished. Innovation is impossible because all innovation requires space for experimentation, for failure, for processes that cannot be fully predefined. They have created a team that functions like a machine in the most negative sense: rigid, incapable of adapting, efficient only in executing exactly what it is programmed to do, and completely lost when conditions change in unforeseen ways. Modern technology has provided the compulsive controller with tools that their historical predecessors could only dream of. Monitoring software that records every keystroke on employees' computers, applications that track GPS location in real time, surveillance cameras in every room of the house accessible from a smartphone, systems that allow reading text messages, emails, browsing histories. The controller enthusiastically adopts these technologies because finally, the world is achieving their vision. Finally, total surveillance that they always knew was necessary is possible. But these tools do not solve their fundamental problem. They only amplify it. Now they have access to more information than they can process, see more things that alarm them, discover more spaces they need to monitor. The technology that promised perfect control only more vividly reveals the impossibility of that project. For every secret he uncovers, he realizes there could be 10 more he has yet to find. For every surveillance system he implements, he becomes aware of gaps in coverage. Technology turns his manageable obsession into a totalitarian one without ever providing the peace he seeks. The controller often rationalizes their behavior with narratives that sound reasonable on the surface. They say they only want the best for their family, that the world is dangerous and someone must be responsible, that their experience has taught them that people cannot be trusted, that they are protecting those under their care from their own naivety. These rationalizations are not entirely false. They contain elements of truth that make them convincing even to themselves. The world contains dangers. People can betray trust. Experience sometimes justifies caution. But the controller takes these partial truths and amplifies them until they become a complete cosmology, a justification for total surveillance, a license to eliminate all other autonomy. It uses the fact that some risks exist to argue that all risks must be eliminated, that any uncertainty is intolerable, that the only possible security is absolute control. It cannot distinguish between reasonable caution and pathological paranoia because its system is calibrated to detect threats in all directions, to interpret every act of autonomy as potential treason, every private space as a potential danger zone. Victims of the compulsive controller develop characteristic symptoms that reveal the psychological cost of living under constant surveillance. They learn to second-guess every decision, to mentally consult the controller even when they are physically absent. They develop hypervigilance over their own behavior, constantly monitoring themselves for any action that could be misinterpreted, any decision that could generate disapproval. Their locus of control is completely externalized. They no longer know what they want or believe independently of the controller, having lost access to their own desires under layers of conditioning that have taught them that desiring things the controller does not approve of is a transgression that will be punished. B. They experience perpetual anxiety because no level of conformity is enough. The rules change arbitrarily. What was acceptable yesterday may be unforgivable today. They live in a constant state of alertness, never fully relaxing, because at any moment, an inspection, interrogation, or accusation based on evidence silently collected over days or weeks could come. It is an existence that replicates the dynamics of totalitarian police states, but on a domestic scale, where the tyrant does not need an army because they have colonized the very consciousness of their victim. This colonization of another's consciousness is perhaps the most disturbing achievement of the successful controller. They are not satisfied with external conformity. They need internal conformity. They need their victims to genuinely adopt their perspectives, internalize their values, become extensions of their will that self-regulate even in their absence. They employ techniques that, without necessarily being aware of it, replicate indoctrination methods developed by cults and totalitarian regimes. They control information, determining which external sources are trustworthy and which are dangerous. Creates economic and emotional dependence, ensuring that their victims have no independent resources to escape. Uses unpredictably punishment and reward, generating a psychological state where victims never know which behavior will produce which result, keeping them constantly trying to please. Isolates victims from external support networks that could offer alternative perspectives. Rewrites shared history, insisting that events victims clearly remember never happened or happened differently. Given enough time, these techniques produce exactly the desired outcome. Victims who have lost the ability to trust their own perceptions, who consult the controller as the ultimate source of reality, who have been successfully convinced that without their supervision, they would collapse into chaos. The paradox is that while the controller successfully degrades the autonomy of their victims, they simultaneously despise them for their lack of autonomy. They complain that their partner cannot make independent decisions, ignoring that they have spent years systematically punishing every attempt at independence. They criticize their employees for lack of initiative, without recognizing that every time someone showed initiative, they were reprimanded for not following exact procedures. They become frustrated with their children for their inability to function without supervision, blind to the fact that they have structured their lives to eliminate all opportunities to develop self-direction skills. They simultaneously need others to be completely dependent on them and despise that dependence as moral weakness. This contradiction is never resolved because they cannot recognize it. Doing so would require admitting that he is the architect of exactly the conditions that frustrate him, that his control has created the incompetencies he cites as justification for more control. The system is perfectly circular, self-justifying, impervious to contradictory evidence. In their intimate relationships, the controller often selects partners who already have histories of trauma or low self-esteem. Not necessarily doing this consciously or maliciously, but their psychological radar has been calibrated to detect vulnerability, to identify people who are already accustomed to subjugating themselves, who already believe they do not deserve better treatment, who will interpret their initial control as loving concern rather than a warning sign. The initial phase of the relationship can be intensely romantic because he has finally found someone who accepts his need for total fusion. And she has finally found someone whose constant attention fills the internal void that has haunted her all her life. But what begins as romantic fusion gradually reveals itself as absorption, as the elimination of boundaries, where only his reality, his needs, his perceptions are valid. She discovers too late that the constant attention she interpreted as love was surveillance, that the concern that flattered her was possession, that the man who seemed so interested in every aspect of her life was not interested in knowing her, but in mapping her to control her better. External friends and family who observe these dynamics often wonder why the victim simply doesn't leave. They offer help, resources, places to stay. They do not understand that leaving first requires recognizing that you should leave. And the controller has spent years eroding exactly that independent judgment. The victim has been convinced that her perceptions are unreliable, that her judgment is flawed, that without the controller, she would make disastrous decisions. She has been trained to doubt her own dissatisfaction, to reinterpret her unhappiness as her own psychological problem rather than a rational response to abuse. Every time she considers leaving, she hears in her head the voice of the controller cataloging all the ways she will fail alone, predicting disasters that justify staying. And if he manages to overcome that inner voice and truly tries to leave, he discovers that he has structured the circumstances to make leaving extremely difficult. He has no access to bank accounts. He has no ownership titles on shared assets. He has not maintained independent friendships because he gradually alienated them all. He has no recent work history because he insisted he stay at home. Leaving is not just an emotional decision. It is a massive logistical project that requires exactly the resources and trust that the controller has systematically eliminated. The controller typically experiences attempts by their victims to leave as unforgivable betrayals that justify escalating control. If their partner tries to leave, it confirms their suspicions that she was never trustworthy, that their vigilance was justified, and that it needs to be intensified even more if she returns. They often alternate between pleas for forgiveness, where they promise to change, and veiled or explicit threats about what will happen if she leaves permanently. This alternation between vulnerability and threat is calculated, although possibly not consciously. The vulnerability appeals to the victim's empathy, to their guilt about abandoning someone who claims to need them desperately. Threats appeal to their fear, to realistic concerns about their safety or that of their children if they actually proceed with the separation. Together, these tactics often achieve their goal of making the victim return, especially if she does not have a strong support network to sustain her during the vulnerable period immediately after leaving. And when she returns, he interprets this as validation that she really needs him, that his control was an expression of love that she finally recognizes, completely blind to the coercion and exhaustion dynamics that truly caused her return. In extreme cases, the controller may escalate to physical violence when their psychological methods of control fail to produce complete compliance. This is not a contradiction of their character, but a logical extension of their psychology. They have built their entire identity around being the person who controls their environment. When that control is fundamentally challenged, when someone insists on their autonomy despite all their manipulation efforts, they experience this as existential annihilation. Violence emerges as a last resort, as a desperate attempt to reimpose. He orders when all other methods have failed. He does not experience this violence as aggression, but as legitimate self-defense of his reality, as a re-establishment of natural hierarchies that the victim is perversely trying to invert. In his internal narrative, he is a victim of her intransigence, of her irrational refusal to accept his guidance, of her rebellion that forces him to take more drastic measures. This inversion of victim and perpetrator is complete in his mind, absolutely convincing to him, allowing him to employ violence while seeing himself as a reasonable person pushed to extremes by the other's irrationality. The treatment of the compulsive controller is notoriously difficult because it requires recognizing something that his entire psychological structure is designed to deny: that he is the problem, that his control is pathology and not a solution, that the security he seeks through domination of others is an illusion that is exactly destroying the relationships he supposedly values. This recognition is almost impossible because it would require confronting the original terror that generated his need for control, revisiting that childhood vulnerability he swore never to experience again. It is easier, less terrifying, to continue insisting that the problem is that others do not cooperate sufficiently with his efforts to structure the world correctly. Therapy only works if he genuinely arrives motivated to change, which is rare. More commonly, he arrives because he has been forced by a partner's ultimatum or by a court order, and then he uses therapy sessions as another arena to try to control narratives, convince the therapist that he is a victim of an irrational partner, learn new psychological vocabulary that he can weaponize to make his control more sophisticated. The skilled therapist recognizes these dynamics and confronts them, but this often results in the controller abandoning treatment, declaring the therapist incompetent or biased, or seeking another professional more receptive to his version of events. The societies that produce compulsive controllers in significant numbers often share characteristics that normalize and reward these very dynamics. Cultures that emphasize rigid hierarchies, associate masculinity with domination, treat female autonomy as a threat, value order over freedom, interpret vulnerability as intolerable weakness. All these cultures are ideal incubators for this psychology. The controller is not merely a damaged individual. He is a product of social systems that have taught him that his worth as a man depends on his ability to dominate his environment, that allowing others, especially women and children, to act independently is a personal failure, and that admitting uncertainty or vulnerability is a shame to be avoided at all costs. He has internalized cultural messages about what it means to be a man, to be a leader, to be responsible, and has amplified those messages through the lens of his own traumas until creating a caricatured and toxic version of masculinity that hurts everyone, including himself. The tragedy of the controller is that he spends his entire life chasing something that is categorically out of his reach. He will never achieve the total control he seeks because other humans are fundamentally uncontrollable in the way he requires. He will never experience the security he pursues because he has confused control with security, not recognizing that genuine security can only emerge from trust, and trust requires exactly the vulnerability he has spent his life avoiding. He dies, often alone or surrounded by people who fear him but do not love him, without having achieved the goal that consumed his existence. He leaves behind a trail of damaged people, destroyed relationships, wasted human potential. And if he is aware in his final moments, he might realize that all his control did not protect him from the fate he feared most, ending vulnerable, dependent, unable to even control his own body as death approaches. Your control was an illusion from the beginning, an elaborate defense against an insecurity that never disappeared. It was only pushed deeper and deeper under layers of domination that ultimately protected nothing. But perhaps the most disturbing question is not about the pathological controller, the one whose compulsion is so extreme that everyone recognizes the pathology. The most disturbing question is about the most subtle forms of this psychology that permeate relationships considered normal, about the spaces where we all exercise control over others, justifying it with rationalizations that sound reasonable. The father who controls every detail of his child's education because he only wants to maximize their future opportunities. The manager who micromanages because he only wants to ensure quality. The partner who casually checks the other's phone because healthy relationships have no secrets. Each of these can be an attenuated version of the same psychology, different in degree, but not in kind. The real question is not whether you know a pathological controller. The real question is, where in your own life have you confused control with love, surveillance with care, restriction with protection? How many of the freedoms you deny others do you deny because it is genuinely better for them, or because their autonomy causes you an anxiety you cannot tolerate? At what point did your need for security turn into a mechanism of domination that you justify with narratives of responsibility and concern? Because the extreme controller is only the visible manifestation of an impulse that exists in many of us in more moderate but structurally identical forms. And recognizing that, confronting the ways in which we all try to control the uncontrollable, because confronting our fundamental vulnerability is too terrifying, that could be the most uncomfortable question of all.